Thank you for joining us today. My name is Keith Larson, and I'm president of the Louisville Forum. The Forum normally meets on the second Wednesday of every month at Vincenzo's Restaurant at noon. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan public issues group founded in 1984. We host debates and discussions of current and sometimes controversial public policy issues that affect the Louisville community. Our programs this past year included interviews with Commissioner of Education Dr. Jason Glass, Chief of Police Erica Shields, and Secretary of State Michael Adams. We also hosted debates on topics ranging from critical race theory, COVID-19 mandates, police officers in schools, home rule cities, and the Kentucky workforce crisis. Membership is open to anyone, and guests are always welcome. For more information on becoming a member, please visit our website, louisvilleforum.org. At this point, I'd like to introduce one of our board members, Nicole Yates, who will be presenting our annual Fleur-de-lis Lifetime Service Award to our guest of honor, Congressman John Yarmuth. First, a quick note about Nicole. Nicole is the Associate Vice President of Community Engagement for Passport Health Plan by Molina Healthcare. In Nicole's prior role, she served as District Director for Congressman Yarmuth, where she oversaw operations at the Congressman's downtown and South End district offices. Please join me in welcoming Nicole.
Good evening. So now you know why I get this distinguished honor. He is my former boss, and we still call him boss. So the highlight of each annual dinner meeting is the Fleur-de-lis Award, given to a local citizen who has made significant contributions to the community throughout his or her career, both at the professional and community service level. Past recipients have been Elaine Sissy Musselman, Dawn G., Frank and Paula Harshaw, Rebecca Jackson, and Denny Crump. So I get the honor tonight to introduce the 2022 winner, John Allen Yarmuth. Born November 4th, 1947. That's very important. He serves as the U.S. representative for Kentucky's 3rd District since 2007. His district composes mostly of Jefferson County in the Louisville metro area. Since 2013, he has been the only Democratic member of Kentucky's congressional delegation. He worked as a legislative aide for Republican U.S. Senator Marlo Cook from 1971 to 1974, and then he returned to Louisville and launched his publishing career by founding the Louisville Today magazine, which operated from 1976 to 1982. He later worked as a vice president of university relations at the University of Louisville from 1983 to 1986. Now, in his 8th term, he has served as chairman of the House Budget Committee since 2019. John has been recognized for his work to improve education, expand access to affordable health care, and for his leadership in enacting the American Rescue Plan, landmark legislation to defeat the pandemic and rebuild our economy. On October 12th, sadly, Congressman Yarmuth announced that he would not be seeking re-election in 2022. And so you guys know him as a congressman, a publisher, a columnist, an editor, a radio talk show host, a politician. But I know him as Kathy's husband, as Aaron's dad, as Sarah's father-in-law, and JJ to JD. What does JJ mean? That's just what he calls you. That's exciting. He's very outspoken, a great boss, a statesman, hardworking, a fighter, a compassionate man. He is very generous, and he has been a civil rights advocate and ally, and so much more. And so at this time, before I bring you to the stage, I would like to direct everyone's attention to a video.
Hello, everyone. It is an honor to be joining you to celebrate a great leader and a friend who has helped move Louisville and our great Commonwealth forward. Congratulations to Congressman John Yarmuth on this award. And thank you, John, for your dedication and your commitment to the people of Kentucky. For 8 terms, you've been representing the great city of Louisville and making all of Kentucky proud. You've always led by putting the needs of our people first, and you've helped pass critical legislation that not only makes a difference in the lives of Kentuckians today, but will have an impact for generations to come. I'm honored to know you and to have had the opportunity to work so closely alongside you during your incredible career of public service. Thank you. Again, congratulations on the Fleur-de-lis Award. Congratulations on all the time you're going to get to spend with family and grandkids. I know retirement is going to be more relaxing than working on Capitol Hill, but I know that you'll still, in your own way, be out there fighting for all our people. Congratulations, John.
And so at this time, I have the very distinct pleasure of introducing to some and presenting to others my friend, Congressman John Yarmuth.
All right, we're going to start the interview portion. I did want to just briefly introduce Phillip. As many of you know, Phillip has been a moderator for us before in the past, and we really enjoyed having him with, I believe it was Police Chief Shields, and he is back by popular demand to be moderating this event tonight. So thank you, Phillip.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us here at the Louisville Forum and Congressman Yarmuth, as always. It was 10 years ago, actually. You know, Facebook memories. I've been on Facebook way too long, by the way. Because now I'm getting memories from like 15, 16 years ago, 20 years ago, pretty soon.
Right.
We had a discussion then, so I certainly am glad to be speaking with you. Let me start with, I want to talk a lot about your life as a Louisvillian, your career in Congress, what you plan to do in retirement and bother your wife and son and grandchild. But I also want to start with what I think is some pertinent international news. Obviously, what's happened in the Ukraine, as we all know, Russian President Vladimir Putin has invaded that country. Today, Congressman, Democrat Adam Schiff, a colleague of yours, was the chair of the House Intelligence Committee. He says that while President Joe Biden likely has enough authority to act on his own, enact sanctions on his own, he expects Congress on a bipartisan basis will do the same, and if needed, support U.S. allies. The president today announced a new round of sanctions targeting Russia after its invasion, charging that Putin, quote, chose this war, and the country will bear the consequences. The sanctions currently are targeting Russian banks, oligarchs, high-tech sectors. Let me ask you as the first question, is that enough?
I'm not sure. I don't think anybody's sure right now. But I'm going to do a quick pivot. I will not ignore you. But I need to say thank you so much for this incredible honor. I have a long history with the Louisville Forum, having been a board member, having been a long-term member, having over the last 15 years done a number of debates with my political opponents before the Louisville Forum and enjoyed all of them, and do truly believe that the kind of dialogue that happens at the Louisville Forum is exactly what we need to begin to break down the polarization of this society, that unless we have competing ideas, competing in the same forum, we will never get to understand each other and hopefully bridge the differences that we have. So thank you for this incredible honor. My wife Kathy's here, my son Aaron, my daughter-in-law Sarah, and our next grandchild Rory is also in the room. Oh. And so appreciate that. So getting back to your question, seriously, you know, I think I was one of many until like 24 hours ago, 48 hours ago, who was very skeptical of the prospect of an invasion of Ukraine. I thought Vladimir Putin was playing poker and not chess, and that he was bluffing, and I was very skeptical of the intelligence that we had. So I was wrong. But what I've realized over the last 24, 48 hours is that we are not dealing with a rational individual, that we are dealing with somebody who clearly has megalomaniacal tendencies, who does not understand the world he's living in, and has made a tragic mistake that many people will pay for, including many Americans as well. I have the greatest respect for Adam and know him well. I think he's right, but I'm not sure at this point if you're dealing with an irrational person who has control of a very formidable military and unfortunately a large collection of nuclear weapons, that the strategies that we are contemplating and we are implementing now will make a difference. You never know when you're dealing with a crazy person what will be effective. So I'm very alarmed. I can see many unintended consequences occurring. I can see Putin if he feels that he is winning, that he might attempt something like invading a NATO member, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, those neighboring countries, and then all hell breaks loose. So I'm very concerned. I think that the Biden administration, the president, have played their cards exactly right up till this point, but I'm not sure that there is any card play that will make a difference.
So it sounds like you're saying that sanctions might not necessarily
Sanctions may not make any difference at all.
One thing that Congressman Schiff said today, Congressman, that I think should alarm many of us, he expressed concern. Remember, he is the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, so this is someone who knows what he's talking about. Congressman Schiff said that he's also concerned about cyber attacks Russia has directed at Ukraine, that it could extend to other countries and companies outside of that country. Are you worried that that could also be one of Putin's cards, playing cyber attacks against the United States, which is something we're not unaccustomed to?
Right. This is one of the wild cards that we're facing right now, and because we've had hints of what cyber attacks can do. I don't think we've ever come close to seeing the magnitude that is possible, the magnitude of destruction or disruption that is possible from cyber attacks. I think what we are, and I don't have any, actually we're getting a classified briefing right now. I'm missing that. But I think there is every reason to believe that we will do something, we, the United States, will do something over the next 24, 48 hours that represents an offensive use of cyber power, basically to let them know what we're capable of. I don't think it will, we're not going to turn off all the electricity in Russia. We're not going to do anything that dramatic, but I think we're going to try to lay our marker down. But again, these are things you never know when they can get out of hand, and that's should be alarming to everyone.
The Congressional Progressive Caucus, which you are a member of, I believe still, issued a statement today saying it agrees with President Biden that there is, quote, no military solution to this conflict. Congressman Yarmuth, is there no scenario in which you see U.S. troops getting involved directly? And by that I mean U.S. troops, physical confrontation, either in Ukraine or somewhere else, with Russian troops, and is taking that option off the table, is that wise when dealing with Putin?
Well, I think there is no chance that we will deploy American troops to Ukraine. We're under no obligation to do it. I think we have invested over $600 million in arming and training Ukraine troops. We'll continue to do that, and I think that's the limit of our involvement there militarily. Again, the real risk is that Putin becomes emboldened and invades a NATO country, in which case we have a legal obligation to defend those countries. right now, I don't think that's likely. As crazy as I think Putin is showing himself to be, I don't think he's that crazy. That would be a suicidal move on his part, because you'd basically have 30 countries, plus including the United States, with a treaty obligation to respond militarily. I don't think he understands that. But again, I think right now, we ought to understand what a fragile situation this is, what a potentially volatile situation is. The one thing that I've seen just over watching the coverage over the last few hours is that Ukraine seems to be putting up a pretty strong military resistance. The Russians took over an air base. The Ukrainians took it back. So it may be a situation in which the military balance is not as lopsided as we might have thought it would be, and the Ukrainians will actually put up a strong resistance, and that may discourage Putin.
I do want to have one final question on Ukraine. In January, the Senate rejected a Republican effort to impose sanctions related to the Russian-German natural gas pipeline during a pivotal period for the future of Ukraine. And broader questions about the transatlantic responses to Putin's newfound aggression. The Senate voted 55-44 against legislation from Senator Ted Cruz of Texas that would have required the imposition within 2 weeks of enactment of sanctions in the form of asset freezes and travel bans on European business officials regarding the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. The bill needed 60 votes to pass. So Democrats used the filibuster, which they often malign. They used the filibuster to stop that. Mitch McConnell said, quote, "We can send a strong warning to Putin, thank you, that he won't be allowed to use energy as a weapon." He supported the idea, obviously. Looking back, was that a mistake by Democrats?
It might have been. Again, I think we're in unpredictable territory, uncharted waters, and I don't think I'm on the record as advocating any particular policy or strategy, and basically because I realize that this is something that could go in a variety of different ways, and Congress has the constitutional responsibility of actually voting to deploy American forces in a foreign country. That is not, the president can do it on an emergency basis, but ultimately the Congress has to decide. I think right now, unfortunately, what we've seen up until yesterday was kind of a predictable partisan response to the crisis, and a lot of very unknowledgeable proposals from both sides.
Okay. Let's get to the program here and the conversation that I want to have with you. So, Congressman, I got to do a lot of research on you.
I'm aware of that.
I tweeted out a little bit of it. I'm a big fan of James Lipton, so I want this to be more conversational.
Yeah.
The first mention of you in the Courier Journal, that I could find at least, was January 5th, 1958. Okay? Those of you who were born that time, keep your hands down. It was a wedding at Adath, excuse me, am I pronouncing that correct? Adath Israel Temple.
Adath Israel.
Gotcha. Of Mr. Stanley Leslie Atlas and Miss June Helen Klein. Now, the story says that you were an usher in that. Is that accurate?
I was an usher.
So you're all of like, what, 11 years old and you're already in the paper?
I was 11 years old. There is actually a much more interesting story about that evening.
Uh-oh.
Because I was an usher, and but I was at the reception, not very well supervised, and one of my good friends at the time, Leslie Abramson, who is now a law professor at the University of Louisville, we got into the champagne.
At 11 years old.
At 11 years old, and that. But that was only the beginning of the story.
Oh.
So when I got home later, obviously I was driven home. I wasn't driving.
You weren't driving, though. Okay. You were 11 and drinking, but not driving. Good. There we go.
But I knew that I felt a little different than I had felt before.
Okay.
And it felt pretty good.
Yeah.
So I knew where my parents' liquor cabinet was. So I actually went in and, there was a wide variety of choices. So I went for the most colorful.
Bourbon?
No.
Oh.
The colorful, which were cherry herring and creme de menthe.
Okay.
Suffice to say that my parents came home later to find me unconscious and and a lot of discharge, a lot of unfortunate discharges.
Well, that could explain.
That was my first total wipeout drunk.
Understood. Now that might explain some future decisions, I guess. Yeah. Now, I know your family immigrated to the U.S. Interestingly from Russia.
Yep.
In the early 1900s. Your name originally was Yarmuth?
That's what they tell me.
And they changed it when they immigrated to America.
Right, so there were 4 brothers and a sister who came to the United States. All of them, except one brother, were advised at Ellis Island to change to Americanize their name.
Right.
Yarmuth may or may not have been their name. I mean, we're dealing with Cyrillic language.
That's the Yarmuth River in Russia?
Yarmuth River in Jordan and Israel and that area.
Gotcha.
So, which is actually spelled differently than they told me that our name originally was. They said it was Yarmuk. Yep. Again, they were dealing in Cyrillic, so I don't know whether that's accurate or not. But all 4 of the 5 siblings changed their name to Yarmuth. One great uncle of mine, Julius, kept his name. So I had a great uncle named Julius Yarmuth for all my life, and then.
Gotcha.
But my grandfather, 2 great uncles, and my great aunt all changed their name to Yarmuth.
Now, the next time you're mentioned in the CJ is January 14th, 1965. This, I think, is the indicator of the John Yarmuth that we all know now. You actually lost a race, the Voice of Democracy contest, to Anna Marie Lynch. But you made a political comeback. A few months later, on April 15th, 1965, you're quoted in the CJ as Atherton's student body president. So you've always been drawn to politics. Where did that come from? Other than the drunken thing at 11.
No, I mean, I was 13 years old when JFK was elected. And JFK was this vibrant, dynamic, young man who replaced the patriarchal Dwight Eisenhower. And to a 13-year-old, he was, kind of godlike. And so I was a huge fan of JFK, and that sparked my interest in politics, which I've never lost.
Now, you served, Nicole mentioned this moments ago, your commitment and passion about civil rights, and that does stand up to your record. I mean, going back to the late 60s and early 70s, you're a member of the Louisville Human Relations Commission. Now, this is a turbulent time in our history, our city's history, right? What did you learn about civil rights and discrimination, specifically about Louisville, ahead of busing? Because other cities are experiencing civil rights, the sit-in movement, et cetera, during the 1960s. But Louisville, as another native Louisvillian, the real sort of clash we had in this community that everyone mentions is busing. What did that time on the Human Relations Commission teach you about discrimination, racism, et cetera, in Louisville specifically, and how it operates?
Well, what it taught me was, first of all, I learned a little bit about the history of housing discrimination in Louisville. That was probably the primary issue that I had not been aware of, that I became aware of then. Clearly, this is in the wake of the Civil Rights Movement, of the March on Washington, and John Lewis at the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and all of that. By the way, I got to walk across. I get a little emotional now because John Lewis is gone, but I got to walk across the bridge with John Lewis.
Right. Who's a personal friend of yours, right?
Personal friend of mine, and one of my favorite pictures of my political career. But anyway, so I'd become aware of that, and it was like, you know, I was like 15 or 16 when most of that stuff was happening, so it was not something that I couldn't participate in. I was a little bit too young.
Right.
You know, you never know whether you would have done it if I were, but soaking all of that in was what prompted me to get involved in those issues.
Because there's, I think, a kinship we can agree. Morgan Watkins, my former colleague at the Courier, I see her here. She knows that when I worked at the Courier, one of my colleagues was Andy Wolfson. I think I see Stephen Ford somewhere out here.
Stephen's here.
Remembers Andy.
Yeah.
And he and I would go to lunch together, and we would joke about, you know, we have sort of the Yo-Oi coalition, right? This kinship between African Americans and Jewish folks, because your family experienced sort of redlining, right? They were barred from certain neighborhoods in this community. They were barred from certain clubs and things. So certainly I think your experience with civil rights is a pertinent one to your career. But I found this fascinating, sort of continuing on with your biography as told by the Courier Journal.
I am still alive, by the way. This is not a eulogy. Although sometimes I feel that way these days. It's kind of
hey, you're the one who retired.
This is the This is the farewell tour. That's
right. I found this to be fascinating as well. The first time you and some guy named Addison Mitchell McConnell Jr. were mentioned together in the Courier was in 1971. McConnell basically recruited you to be in politics, right? Do you see the irony in that?
I not only see the irony, but I also see the Machiavellian instincts that Mitch McConnell has always had. Because Mitch McConnell in 1981 recruited me to run on a ticket with him for county commissioner. I was a Republican then, and there was a 2-2 split on fiscal court at the time. Fiscal court, some people are too young to remember that, was the governing body of the county before we merged. And there was a woman named Sylvia Watson who was a Democrat from A district, which was the eastern part of the county, and he was trying to beat her so he would get a 3-to-1 advantage. So he recruited me to run as for that county commissioner spot, and he recruited John Hayburn at the same time to run as county attorney to try and beat Bruce Miller, who was the incumbent Democrat. And what was interesting throughout the whole campaign, Mitch ran the whole campaign. Any money we raised for that campaign went into a joint campaign committee. We didn't control it, Mitch controlled it. And we realized after a while, John and I did, that this is what it was all about. It was people who could raise money or invest money, and it all went to, and Mitch could deploy it any way he wanted to. And the reason we realized that finally was that after about 3 months or 4 months of campaigning, where we were out at International Harvester, doesn't exist anymore, but you know, at 5 o'clock in the morning doing shift changes and all this stuff, and nobody that we saw wanted to talk about politics. Most of them didn't live in Jefferson County, and Mitch was never with us. So we realized, I think we're being used here. But it was a great opportunity for me to get involved in politics, but also to establish an incredible relationship with a phenomenal human being, John Hayburn.
Now, you, of course, during that time, you're working for former U.S. Senator Marlo Cook, right? A few years later, Cook fails to win re-election.
Right.
And I just want to put everyone's mind back in this period, right? Not 2022, right? Take your mind back to the 70s, politically speaking. So you come back to Louisville, and you actually are organizing this GOP slate to seize the then Louisville Board of Aldermen. Here's what I really want to ask you. Describe Republican John Yarmuth to me. What is your conservatism? You are a liberal's liberal today, but then are you a Rockefeller Republican? Are you a Goldwater Republican? And here's the thing I really want to ask. Are there any views that you look back and go and look at Republican John Yarmuth and regret?
No, because at that time, we're talking about 1975, It was actually pretty easy to be a very liberal Republican.
So you were still a liberal by your standards?
Yes, there was a place. I mean, if you looked at the U.S. Senate at that point, which I had, again, been there, I'd been a staffer for 4 years, and I came back, you had Ed Brooke from Massachusetts, you had Mark Hatfield from Oregon, Bob Packwood from Oregon, Margaret Chase Smith from Maine, Jacob Javits from New York. You had very, very liberal people, even by today's standards, very, very liberal people in the Republican Party. And so you were not uncomfortable as being a liberal then. And, I think, I probably was more of a devotee of capitalism than I am today. I mean, I appreciate capitalism now, but I understand the flaws in capitalism. I probably didn't do that at that time. My father was a successful business person and a Republican, and so from that perspective, I've evolved. But again, at that time, the Republican Party was the party of civil rights. The Democrats were the Dixiecrats. You had Russell Long and James Sparkman and John Stennis and all these, and crazy people. And yes, you had Ted Kennedy and Fritz Mondale and Hubert Humphrey, but still it was like, how can the Democrats embrace these people who are antithetical to everything that they believe? And so, again, the Republican Party, 1975, was a more comfortable spot for me than it became.
Before we get into your period in Congress, and again, I want to remind folks to fill out your forms if you have any questions that I miss or don't ask. You got into publishing, right? Louisville Today was your first attempt at that.
Yep.
You started involved others like City Paper. I did read that you published a letter describing how to make the H-bomb, so you were, you were there.
I love that. I love that. Oh my God.
But let me ask, what sparked you to get into that world, right? Like, is it, okay, politics isn't, again, this is late 1970s, 1980s. Is your life sort of saying, politics maybe isn't my thing, let me get into publishing? What got you into being a muckraker?
I'm not sure this is all that interesting a story, but when I was a staffer for Marlow, one of the things, Marlow Cook, by the way, Republican senator, one term, one of the things, my primary responsibility was as his top writer. I wrote virtually everything he said. As top speechwriter, I shouldn't say top, I was his primary speechwriter. And I realized that I actually had a talent for expressing myself verbally and in writing.
Worked out pretty well for you.
Yeah, worked out. And then there was an event when, I don't know if I'll tell the story. So a lobbyist, back when you could do this, a lobbyist took me to the Super Bowl in 1973. It was the Miami Dolphins and the Washington Redskins. And I was not a football fan, but this lobbyist was. And we were working on something that he felt he could justify a trip to the Super Bowl. So he called me and said, you want to go to California for the Super Bowl? And it was like first class all the way. We're going out there, and I kept thinking to myself, this is great. How can I do this for a living? And I came up with an idea. To do a Sunday supplement sports publication. So
you get all the free tickets.
Like Parade, like Parade magazine, but based on sports, where and this is back when obviously you don't have the multitude of sports events on media, but it was all the whole idea was every Sunday you would do a preview of the week ahead in sports. Right. Tied to television, even though television, again, there weren't that many. And I talked to people like Howard Cosell and Bill Veeck and a bunch of other people, and they all were very encouraging. And I came back and presented this to my father, who was still alive at that time. And he was a hard sell, but he actually agreed to back me in it. And then he died. It didn't work, but that's how I started getting involved, thinking about journalism and thinking about publishing. And that led to Louisville Today in 1976.
And that was, I mean, very different than Leo, right? I mean,
very
Louisville Today
different.
was very different.
Very different. Louisville Today was modeled after the Washingtonian magazine, which I had read religiously when I was a staffer there. And you know, I said, well, gosh, this is a great concept. It ought to work anywhere. And so I started it in Louisville. We did it for almost 6 years. We published, which is a lot longer than most publications last. But what happened was we were competing then against Louisville Magazine, which was then owned by the Chamber of Commerce here. And what I found out after the 5 or 6 years was that no matter how different editorially the publications were, and ours, we had far more readership than Louisville Magazine did.
Humble brag.
Yeah, and so forth. But there's a universe of advertisers. You have to figure out who's going to pay for it. There's a universe of advertisers that there weren't enough of in Louisville to support 2 publications. And since the Louisville Magazine was being subsidized at that time by the Chamber, we gave it up. But anyway, that was that first experience. And during the period I was doing that, we started a paper called City Paper. You mentioned that, which was the first alternative weekly. Well, it wasn't a weekly. We did it on a monthly basis. We won a bunch of journalism awards. It was free circulation, like Leo ended up being. We won a bunch of awards. We did great journalism. And we made the incredibly stupid decision of drop after 2 years of getting rid of that and staying with Louisville Today, which ultimately didn't make it. But that was basically the genesis of Leo several years later.
And full disclosure, I worked at Leo, but you had sold it at that point, right?
I had sold it, yes. I didn't hire you.
Before I get asked the question about Congress, I did watch
But I'm proud of you.
Thank you, thank you. You did pretty well too, sir. Thank you. Before we get into the issue of the Congress and you running for Congress, I mentioned before your work at Civil Rights. Louisville obviously has a history with Jerry Abramson, a long time, the mayor for life for a long period of time, Jewish mayor here in Louisville. You as a congressman, I know your faith is important to you, your identity is important to you. This week, 2 state legislators, were called out for using the phrase, quote, Jew them down, in reference to bargaining for a lower price on a lease. You said this on Twitter. I thought this was important to point out. You said, quote, as a Jew born just after the Holocaust, I can tell you that this increasingly common casual bigotry from today's Republican Party is not just a stain on our Commonwealth and country, it is an urgent threat. Every Kentuckian must do their part to rid our government of this filth. Congressman, I must ask you, do you believe what happened to Craig Greenberg last week is another example of this filth?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. You know, my first reaction when I heard about the shooting and I talked to Craig that afternoon was, well, this has to have been anti-Semitism. But on the other hand, I didn't know at that point who had done the shooting, allegedly done the shooting, Quintez Brown. So my first instinct was to think this was anti-Semitic. And then after learning it was Quintez Brown and that he had had what appears to be some mental problems because he disappeared last year and his family, you know, basically they implied that he had had some mental issues. A brilliant, brilliant young man, I think everyone would agree. I started thinking that it was maybe that the anti-Semitic thing was not the motivation, that it was either his personal mental health issues or maybe it may have been racial.
How so?
Because he's running in a primary against two African-American candidates, and he's the front runner. And I'm trying, you know, this is silly for me to project what may have been going through Quintez's mind, but this is the way I was thinking, that maybe it was he was going to eliminate the front runner so he gives the black candidate a better chance of winning. So I started to think differently from the Jewish angle.
Because, I mean, when you look online at some of these criticisms of Mr. Greenberg, I mean, some of them, these depictions of him on social media and in some of these videos, I've seen some of these pictures myself, where you have like Steve Tarver, the head of Republic Bank, sitting on Mr. Greenberg's shoulder, giving him instruction, even though he's not his, it's the other way around.
Right.
I mean, that to me is a little, right? I mean, that goes back to some cartoons of Jewish people sort of being in control of the banks. And do you believe that some of these attacks against Craig Greenberg, particularly surrounding the West End TIF, let's say the words out loud, have a hint of anti-Semitism to them?
Well, I think they do. I don't think there's any question about that. And that's sad, but you know, that's the reality. That's where we are in the world. I mean, there's racism, there's anti-Semitism. We're seeing it every day. The comments of the two state legislators here are an indication of that. And you know, they say, they try to pass it off as saying, well, that's just the way we talk down there. Well, you know, Donald Trump said the same thing basically to the AIPAC meeting in Washington a few years ago, where he said, you know, made a comment about Jews and money and so forth. So I understand that, but that doesn't excuse it. It doesn't justify it.
Now, I know you're particularly sensitive about this topic because I think of your friendship with former Congressman from Arizona, Gabrielle Giffords.
Yeah.
I interviewed you, I think, right after that shooting when everyone was gravely concerned. She was shot. She lived, thankfully. Do you think this assassination attempt, alleged assassination attempt on Mr. Greenberg, does that change our politics in Louisville? Do you think that it changes not just this race, but how we operate? I know that was something you were really worried about in light of what happened to Giffords back in so many years ago. Do you think that changes our politics here or no?
I think it is part of a national. It's probably one instance that should be part of a national wake-up call, and that is that, unfortunately, there are too many people in this country who think that the answer to political disputes is violence. And I'm not going to go any further than that, but that brings it home. I mean, you know, 15 and a half years, thank God, I've had threats, but I've never really been threatened, and certainly not assaulted or shot at. And, you know, I've never had security. The only time I've ever had security was when we did a town hall meeting on the Affordable Care Act back in 2009.
At Central High School, right? My alma mater, go Central.
At Central High School.
Yeah.
And, but,
remember that.
My first or second thought after Craig's incident was, have I really been totally naive all these years and just running around town and not having security or not even worry about it? And I probably was, but I've been lucky. On the other hand, you know, Louisville is an incredibly friendly, polite, genteel community overall. And I tell people all the time this, and they kind of don't believe me, but I can count on two hands the number of uncomfortable encounters I've had in 15 plus years as a member of Congress in this community. And most of them are really not that bad. I mean, they say, Congressman, I really hate everything you do and everything you stand for, but I appreciate the fact you're willing to serve. That's as bad. That's as bad as it gets. So I think I've had reason not to be concerned, but that shook me a little bit. Yeah, just in the sense of, you know, maybe I was a little bit too naive over the last 15 years about that. But, you know, here I am, so fortunately, knock on wood.
Now, you ran for Congress in 2006 during really the height of the anti-Iraq war period.
Yeah.
Initially, you were okay with Andrew Horn running. I'm researching and found out. At least you said that in prior interviews that at first you were okay with it. Then Mark Murphy calls you, apparently, and threatens that he's going to run.
It wasn't a threat.
And then you got, you know, your motivation to run. But what changed your mind, right? Like, what got you to give up what was a pretty comfortable life
It was a very comfortable life.
Right. What made you decide that, let me give up that comfortable life and submit my family and myself to people like me harassing you all day?
Well, in 2005, looking forward to the 2006 election, I thought Jack Conway was going to run. He had run in 2002 and had barely lost to Ann Northup. And Jack and I are good friends, and I was looking forward to supporting him. And then he called me and told me he wasn't going to run. And my first reaction was, oh, damn, now she's got a free pass again.
She being former Congresswoman
Ann
Ann Northup.
Because I didn't think there was anybody out there who had a chance to be competitive with her. So I started thinking about the race, and at that time, we, the Democrats, had to flip 15 seats nationally in the House to take control and thereby put an end to the Bush agenda. And while I was a strong opponent of the Iraq War and was very outspoken on television with John Ziegler and others, my primary objection to the Bush agenda was the tax cuts that he put through in 2001, 2003, which just overwhelmingly benefited the wealthiest Americans. That was my biggest concern rather than Iraq War. But anyway, so I said, you know, like you said, I've got a great life. I'm not really looking for a new career, but if I can be part of flipping control of the House and stopping the Bush agenda, that will be worth doing, even if I don't like the job. And so I started talking to people, talked to Tim Longmire, who was then Jefferson County Democratic chair, and I said, you know, I'm thinking about the 3rd District race, and he said, well, that's great, but we already found a candidate that we like, and we vetted him with the National Party. It's Andrew Horn. And I said, oh, great, well, I don't want to mess things up with the primary. I look forward to meeting him and supporting him. And as you said, the next week, Mark Murphy called me and said, John, I know Andrew Horn. He's a great guy. I practice law with him. I really like him. He's not nearly as progressive as you or I, and if you don't run, I'm going to. So then I said, okay, well, there's going to be a primary in one way or another. So I kept pursuing it and talked to some of the bigger Democratic donors and supporters, and they all said, oh, we much prefer you, and then, you know, the rest is history. I will say, and I'll probably lose it again here, about 10 days or so before the filing deadline, I decided not to do it.
Yeah.
And I told Aaron, and I don't think we've ever talked about this. But anyway, I could tell when I told him how disappointed he was.
Yeah.
So I said, okay.
So it's your fault.
Yeah.
Got you. Understood.
So okay, I need to rethink this, and because I didn't want to disappoint him, and you know, bless her, Kathy was, you know, whatever you want to do, you know, okay, whatever you want to do. But anyway, so the rest is history, and here I am 8 terms later, and never thinking again, I didn't know whether I'd be there more than 1 term, but here, but just eternally grateful for the honor of having served, and obviously I've been involved in a lot of important history, and you know, JD and Rory will get to say their grandfather was in Congress.
I want to get to audience questions, but I have one more question before we turn things over to Nicole to get some audience questions integrated into this conversation. Do you think your time as a Republican, a liberal Republican, in addition to your name ID, do you think that gave you an insight? Because, I mean, the closest race you had was the race against Northup in 2006, right? It was 1 point, I think, or 2 points.
3 points.
Or 3 points. So look at you, see? And then you blew her out.
51-48. Yeah.
Do you know the exact number?
6,800 votes.
I thought you knew. I was going to add. There you go. And then you beat her, I think, by like
68,000.
Yeah. The next go round, you're like, yeah.
Of course, I was running with Barack Obama in 2008, which was a pretty good edge.
Right. And you haven't had a close contest really since then. No. You're winning about 20, 30 points. Do you think some of that is your relationship with Republicans here, the Valhalla Republicans? Right? People you know sort of your former life as a
Frank,
Republican?
where are you, Frank? Harshaw.
You think that helps a little bit?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question that my contacts beyond the Democratic Party have helped create an image that I'm at least a reasonable Democrat.
By Republican standards?
By Republican standards,
Understood.
yeah. I think whether or not that's true is another question, but I think that, I've had a lot of Republicans say that to me. One of the other things, back when Rand Paul ran in, what was it, 2010, the first time, we were doing polling, and we had Rand Paul in the polling, and I was getting about 25% of Rand Paul's voters. Mm. And when we broke it down, what the analysis was that people respected the fact that I and Rand said what we thought, that we were intellectually honest. And, so I think there were a lot of Republicans who probably didn't agree with me on a lot of issues, but he believes that, he's honest, and so forth. And I think there were some Democrats who felt that way about Rand as well.
Gotcha. Nicole, if you have any questions from the audience,
I do. So the first one, I would like John to explain why he has the F on his lapel. It is not a four-letter word.
It is not, although it can multi-purpose. Back in 2018, I was at dinner one night with Kathy and Aaron and Sarah. Sarah was then Aaron's fiance. And I said, I'm thinking about having a pin made that says, proud to have an F rating from the NRA, National Rifle Association. And Sarah says, don't do that, just do an F. And I said, you're right, that's brilliant. So we had pins made. I put one on, took a picture of it, put it out on social media, said, proud to display my F rating from the NRA. It went viral. I got enormous response. I started giving them to my colleagues. They did the same thing, and they were getting incredible responses online. And a few months later, the NRA announced that they were taking their ratings off their website because, quote, our enemies are using them against us. So I'm really proud of that. I thank Sarah for the inspiration.
Yeah, it's one of the...
So now it's 3.5 years later. It'll be 4 years in August that I've been wearing this every day, and the reaction's great. Even the Republicans think it's hysterical.
Yeah.
The Republicans in Congress think it's hysterical.
It's one of my favorite stories.
I offer them all pins, but...
Yeah. Phillip, so I have a couple more questions. Is
Sure.
that okay? All right, great. I'm going to put two of them together here. January 6th committee seems to be taking a while to bring charges against Trump. Despite 5,000 pages and hundreds of witnesses, what is the delay, and will Trump emerge again in a national way? Then what?
Well, I don't think he's gone away, sadly, but no, the January 6th committee has no power to prosecute or charge anyone. All it can do is issue a report and make referrals to the Justice Department, and that's what I suspect it will do at some point. So The idea behind the special committee is to gather all the information as to what led up to the January 6th insurrection, attack, whatever you want to call it, and so the American people will understand what happened so that we can, if there are any steps necessary to prevent it from happening again, we would propose those steps. But again, from a charging perspective, the committee has no ability to do that. I think the committee's interviewed more than 400 witnesses now and has millions of pages of documents. Yes, they have taken their time, but I think sometime in either later in March or April, they're going to have public hearings on television where they will actually, the American people will get a much clearer picture of what went on that day. So yeah, it's taken them a while, but they're being very, very thoughtful and systematic about it. But again, they can't charge anybody.
Phillip, were you going to ask him what he was doing and where he was on January 6th?
We will get to that.
Okay. Okay, then I'm going to move on to one more question. Is that all right?
Sure.
Okay. You have been a huge advocate for public education, stemming from your days at Atherton High School. The pandemic has presented quite a crisis for our teachers and students. What do you hope we accomplish once the ARP funds run out?
Well, like everybody else, I hope we get the kids back in school very quickly. I hope we teach them all sorts of things, including the mixed history of race in this country. And I hope we ignore the blatant racist politics that members of legislatures across the country are playing with coming up with these ridiculous proposals to stop teaching something that's not being taught, and parents who are trying to purge books from libraries which have been around for 30 and 40 years, and all of a sudden they become a danger to our kids. I say that having thought it very carefully. The other day, I called BS, but I said the whole words on all of this stuff, saying we're just trying to make sure that true American values are taught in our schools. That's nonsense. This is all racist politics, and I think we ought to call it out for what it is. And I will continue to do that. But we've got a lot of problems with public education. We've got a lot of problems with education overall in this country. You know, I think, just to give you one kind of data point that is mind-boggling to me, in 2010, there was an analysis that said that the store of knowledge in the world doubled every 13 months. Okay, 2010, store of knowledge in the world doubled every 13 months. In 2030, it will double every 12 minutes.
Yep.
So with that kind of environment, we have to figure out what our kids need to know, and what they need to know is not knowledge. They need to know how to access knowledge, how to vet knowledge, how to critically analyze knowledge, and I think we need to have a total revolution in our education system. You know, the number, who knows whether this is true or not, but a few years ago they said if you're in the first grade now, by the time you get into the job market, 2/3 of the jobs that exist do not exist today. So it's kind of like we have to rethink everything about how we raise our kids and teach our kids and prepare them for a world that's changing as rapidly, more rapidly than it ever has, and that really none of us can contemplate. So we got a lot of problems with education, but we got to we've got to start with the perspective that we need educators to figure this out. We can't let parents who really don't have a clue.
Congressman, I want to shift gears a little bit and get you back into Louisville
That
politics.
includes me as a parent.
And get you back into Louisville politics, a conversation I've wanted to have with you for a few weeks now. Now, correct me if I'm wrong in any of this, I'm sure you will. But in January 2021, there were reports that you spoke with State Representative Attica Scott. I'd like to discuss this with you, because I think the timeline is really important here. You told her you were running for re-election at that moment, around that time, January, February of 2021. And she said, apparently, that she wasn't going to challenge you. First, let me, really quick, is that accurate? Is that conversation
I don't
accurate?
remember the exact date. It was early in 2021. She called me and she said, John, I want to run for your job. I will not challenge you, but I'd like, if you're willing, I'd like you to tell me your plans, what you're thinking. And I said, Attica, I'm not sure, but I'm not sure about next election, but I guarantee you I will not be on the ballot in 2024. And we had a nice talk, and that was it. And then a couple months later, she...
So when you did finally announce you were retiring, you did tell State Senator Morgan McGarvey, right?
Well, I'll tell you what I did. I called Morgan. I announced in October. I called him probably late summer and asked him if, I said, you know, I'm undecided as to whether I'm going to run or not. I'm trying to make that decision. If I don't, will you? And he said, I have to talk to Chris, his wife. And then I talked to him sometime later, and he said, yeah, I will.
But Congressman, do you see, I guess, how that underscores the point of Louisville politics being a good old boy system that benefits particularly affluent white people?
No, I don't think so at all.
You don't think so at all?
No, I don't think so at all. If Nicole Yates had called me and said, I'm moving to the 3rd District from Indiana and I'm running, I never would have done any of that. And it wasn't just that Attica decided that she lied to me and decided to challenge me anyway. It was just that I wanted to make sure that there were quality candidates in the race, multiple quality candidates. And Morgan was one who had expressed and over time I knew he had expressed an interest in serving in that job at some point. At that point, Attica's already in the race, so there's no reason for me to talk to Attica.
That seemed like it aggravated you, though, that she jumped in.
I mean, it aggravated me that she lied to me, but it didn't aggravate me that she was in the race. I mean, that's reality. You know, we did a poll in August, and that had me and Attica and I think a few others. And, you know, I would have beaten Attica overwhelmingly, according to that poll. So it wasn't that, it was just that I didn't want to lose the seat. That was the other thing. And I will tell you this, and you know, I probably, you know, this is anecdotal, but when Attica got in the race, announced, I can't tell you the number of people, including an awful lot of black Louisvillians, who said to me, don't worry about a thing, we've got your back. We're never going to be for her. And so I'm starting to think, well, I want to make sure that if I step down, that we don't lose the seat. So I was looking for other candidates.
So you're legitimately concerned that if Attica Scott were the nominee,
that we would lose the seat.
Is there anything that actually backs that up? I mean, because Louisville's an overwhelmingly Democratic district. I mean, you're winning by 20, 30 points. And yes, right. I mean, Representative Scott's viewpoints are slightly to the left of yours, but she's not she's not like further left than you. So what's the fear of her?
I've always been a fan of Attica's.
All right, so what's the fear of her being the nominee?
The fear was that, first of all, the day after Attica Scott announced she was challenging me, Breonna Taylor's mother endorsed me. Mm-hmm. That gave me a lot of concern. And so I'm saying, okay, if the black community's not going to be behind Attica, let's see who is. To be honest, I thought there would be 7 or 8 candidates in the race. I thought Aaron might get in the race. So obviously, if Aaron had gotten in the race, I would have endorsed him. So, but you know, if Kevin Cosby had gotten in the race, I probably would have endorsed him. This has nothing to do with it. I think I would love to see.
But the optics, though. I mean, you've never endorsed in primaries that I can recall.
No,
you're shy about doing that. You've endorsed in this one.
I have endorsed in presidential primaries, not in local office. But it occurred to me at this year, after 15 years, and with only 2 candidates in the race, that I have a perspective on the job as to who would do the best job, and I decided that I probably had a responsibility.
But what do you say, to challenge you here, Congressman, what do you say to those who make the point of, it seems as if you're saying, because Attica's point of her race, a lot of it is, you know, we need diverse representation in Washington.
Right. Yeah.
Right? And that's
so that's kind of reverse racism.
But here's my question, though. It seems as if you and Senator McGarvey, conspired to keep this African-American woman out of office. What do you say to people who make that accusation?
She was in the race. She had a 4 or 5 month head start over Morgan. And again, if I got out of the race, she had this whole head start. And I think the fact that, you know, and again, money's not always their greatest indicator, and I won't talk about how much Morgan's raised, but she's raised $80,000 up to this point.
He's raised about $800,000, about 10 times as much.
Yeah, exactly. But the fact that she has been unable to raise very much money over that same period of time, having a head start on Morgan when Morgan wasn't even in the race, that indicates to me that she's probably not the strongest candidate.
Because those optics really matter on Democratic politics more so than
Republican. I know, and you know, Carla Wallace wrote a letter to the editor, and Carla's been a supporter of mine, and I've been a supporter of most of Carla's causes as well. And she's critical of that for the same point. But to me, it was almost like she thought that Attica was entitled to the seat. And that, you know, I would reject for anyone.
What is your relationship with the squad? Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Representative Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts, and others. What is your relationship with them, politically speaking? Have they been a great addition to the House? Have they caused more problems? People like to sort of blame them for a lot of the problems that are going on.
No, I mean, first of all, they're not all the same.
Right.
They're definitely not all the same. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is an incredibly brilliant, very, very strong member of the House. She's a great legislator. She does her homework. She really is solid.
Has she been an asset to the Democratic
Party?
Party?
She's very collegial. I think absolutely. Now, she's also a target. We understand that, but that's the game. Rashida Tlaib has been a little bit more of a fire thrower and been out on the extreme. Ilhan Omar from Minnesota, she's been on my committee. I think the world of her. She's a very good person. I defended her when she got criticized by Jewish supporters for taking on AIPAC. I've taken on AIPAC as well. And we've sat down and talked about that, and I've tried to counsel her a little bit about the best way to talk about Middle East issues. And she's been very, very receptive in that regard. So it's a mixed bag. Overall, you know, that's, again, for the right-wing machine, that's easy thing to do. It's the same thing that we would do with Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Madison Cawthorn. We say, you know, here are the Republican lunatics, and here's the squad. So take your pick.
In refereeing the current Democratic Party, because like I said, a lot of folks like to pick on and say, look, the squad and folks in the House Democrats have gone too far to the left. But there are others within your party, in the base of progressives, who argue that Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Senator Sinema of Arizona, that they're the problem, that they're the reason why you haven't seen Build Back Better pass through legislation, voting rights, police accountability. The list goes on and on of things that Democrats have not been able to accomplish in Washington. Where do you sit on that? Is it House Democrats and some of your colleagues are drifting the party too far to the left and not where regular Americans are? Or is it that these conservative, moderate, whatever you want to call them, senators are holding up the agenda for either personal or political reasons? Where do you sit on that?
Well, so I kind of reject the notion of, you know, ultra-liberal policies and so forth. I think if you're talking about early childhood education, The notion that providing universal early childhood education for American children is a radical position is bizarre to me. Every other developed nation in the world does that routinely. I mean, you know, if you're in Belgium, there's mandatory full-day preschool at 2.5 years old. And that's true across the developed world. So the idea that that's crazy, the idea that we would do something to make sure that there's adequate child care, access to affordable child care in the country, that's radical. Ask any mother if that's radical. I think you'll get a very profound answer. So what we've been trying to do there, I think, is to actually bring this country into the 21st century, and we understand that people are going to criticize it as being socialism, but you know, every advanced society has an element of socialism to it. Social Security is socialism, Medicare is socialism, if you want to define it broadly. So the words that we use to describe the policies, I think, don't help the American people actually make a judgment.
Because I've seen polling working at USA Today that shows a lot of times that it's not necessarily the policies that people end up fighting or disagreeing with, it's the person delivering the policies.
Right. Yeah,
if AOC says it, I hate it, but if Joe Manchin says it, I hate it, it's the delivery.
Yeah, I think you're right, and that's fortunate. We live in a world, I can say this now that I'm a lame duck, because I can insult voters to a certain extent. Voters, for the most part, not in this room, of course, because we are all enlightened and informed and so forth, but most voters don't, the issues that we deal with are, particularly in Washington, are really complicated issues. There's nothing easy. There are all sorts of nuances to it. You know, you talk about healthcare policy, immigration policy, education. These aren't simple topics. So what does the average American do? They don't have the time or energy, and in many cases, the resources to do the same kind of analysis of these issues that other people do. So they default to their team, and they default to the person they trust, whether it's Donald Trump or Barack Obama or Joe Biden. And so we never have the kind, here's a suck up for you, we never have the kind of discussion that the Louisville Forum has every month about these issues. And that's...
Before I turn the questions over to Nicole to get some more audience questions, I do want to ask you about the reverse of that, right? Like, you get just as much criticism from other progressives for your friendships with, like, former White House Chief of Staff Mulvaney, who you considered a friend.
Yeah.
Two quick questions. One, what do you say to liberals and progressives who argue that those close ties aren't helpful? That these Republicans are not just, it's not just a policy debate. They are doing things that are having a detrimental impact on people's lives. And your friendships with them don't actually help in any sort of real political way, and it's not really good for our party and for progressive politics. And my other question, right behind that, is, do you consider Mitch McConnell your friend?
No.
Okay. Okay.
No, I mean, again, Mitch and I go back 50 to 1968, whatever that is, 54 years now, and but we've never been friends. We've been civil. We were political allies at one time, and now we're political opponents, but not a friend. The thing about, so, you know, I don't say a word to Lauren Boebert. Well, sometimes I have to, because she's on the budget committee and I have to rule her out of order. But, and I would never talk to Marjorie Taylor Greene because I can't abide her. I used to be friends with Thomas Massey. I can't abide him now. I can't talk to him because I think he's gone totally off the reality spectrum. Rand Paul and I used to be friends. I have a really hard time dealing with Rand now. Mick Mulvaney, I actually talked to him last week. Mick Mulvaney, Trey Gowdy, some of the people, Republicans I've been friends with, are very serious people. They were in government because they they felt they had a perspective that was important. I always enjoyed debating them and talking with them. And you know, I remember one time I was on Geraldo Rivera's radio show with Trey, and he introduced us, and I didn't know who was going to be on with me when I did it. And so he says, today's guests are John Yarmuth from Kentucky and Trey Gowdy from South Carolina. I said, oh, damn, I got to be on with Trey. This is not going to work. And so Trey comes, he introduces Trey first and says, well, Geraldo, it's great to be with you. And it's great to be with my friend John Yarmuth, who's one of the nicest people on earth. And I said, back at you, Trey. And we had this conversation that was wonderfully civil. And you know, we'd say, well, Trey makes a good point, but I have a little bit different perspective, and he would do the same thing. It was the kind of conversation we all need to have all the time about controversial issues. And I know Geraldo was saying, who the hell booked these two? This is not what I want. But we could have that kind of relationship because we were both serious about what we were doing. Some of these people now are not serious about what they're doing. They are in Congress, in politics, to get attention. That's it. And it's very, very frustrating. And while it's not, you know, the primary reason I decided to retire from Congress was because I just want to have more control over whatever time I have left on Earth. I can't deny that that kind of attitude that I see in some of the people wasn't responsible for it. And it's just, you know, after January 6th changed everything in Washington. It changed everything. And when, you know, you have the majority of the other party who are not willing to criticize the people who did what they did and who threatened your lives and the lives of your colleagues, it's hard to deal with them on a collegial basis. And
Nicole?
Okay. One, what has been your proudest moment, legislation, while in Congress? Two, did you, being the budget chair, have any reaction to your retirement? Did you think about that? Because you could probably continue being the budget chair. And then again, where you were on January 6th.
Okay. Proudest moment, I have to say, was the passage of the American Rescue Plan, which had,
Before that, would it have been the health care?
It would have been the ACA.
Okay.
Right. As a matter of fact, going back to 2010, when we passed it in the middle of the night, well, it wasn't the middle of the night, but it was midnight, and I walked off the floor with David Obey. David Obey was a long-serving member from Wisconsin, Madison, Wisconsin, chair of the Appropriations Committee, and 42 years he served in the House. And we walked off. We had become friends, and he came off the floor with me, and he said, you know, I don't know why I ever want to come back here, because nothing I will ever do again will be as significant as what we just did. And then a few months later, he announced he was going to leave Congress. And that's not really the way I felt about the American Rescue Plan, but having my name as the author of that bill, and you know, it was like the old joke about the turtle on the fence post. He didn't get there by himself. I got a lot of credit for it and we had 13 committees who worked on it, and obviously in the Senate the same. But it forever, you know, I said the other day that I need to have, in the Build Back Better Act, or whatever it ends up being, I need $300 billion more spent under my name, and I will have spent more money than anybody in the history of the country. So that's it's the distinction that I'm trying to work toward. But you know, to be able to do that, and then I'll try not to get emotional again. I've already done enough of that. But at 3 o'clock in the morning, the night we passed it for the final time, I'm driving back to my condo, and it all hit me. And I said, God, do you realize how many tens of millions of people you just helped? I mean, the idea you lift so many children out of poverty, and you've done all this bill. And it was, no. It was really an amazing feeling. And then I got like 3 hours sleep. I get up the next day and fly back here, and Kathy and I are eating lunch, and the phone rings, and it was some weird number that I didn't recognize, but I said, okay, it was some like 0000 something. I pick it up because I said, I better answer that. Pick it up. The woman said, do you have time to talk to the president? And I said, yeah, I think I do. And so Joe Biden was on the phone and thanked me for everything we did. We had a wonderful conversation, and I held it together for the 3 or 4 minutes we were on the phone, and then when I hung up, I totally lost it, and Kathy videotaped or recorded it, so I've got that. But, so yeah, that has to be number one. ACA was number two. One other thing that I'm really proud of that got very little attention, but there was a problem with the survivor benefits for spouses of service members who died. And it was called the widow's tax, and I won't go into the weeds, but for 30 years they had tried to fix it. And nobody was able to do it because it was expensive to do it and comply with PAYGO rules. PAYGO rules are that if you're going to create a new expense, you have to have an offset. You either have to cut spending somewhere else or raise revenues. And so everybody agreed it should be changed, but nobody could fix it. And finally, I took it on myself to do it. And I worked with Doug Jones, who was then the senator from Alabama. And I finally got Adam Smith, who's chairman of the Armed Services Committee, to put it in the National Defense Authorization Act of that year, which is a must-pass thing. And he basically told me early on, he said, I'm not going to do it, I'm not going to do it. It was like $7 billion. That was it. And he said, I can't find $7 billion more. And so I kept after him, and he finally said, oh yeah, they're pissing me off anyway, so I'll put it in there. And so we got it done, and it's about 64,000 surviving spouses for whom this meant about $11,000 or $12,000 a year in added benefits. And it was just, again, small thing in the grand scheme of things, but it's something I'm really proud that we were really able to do. And that was one that it was my staff and I being really pains in the ass, and finally got it done. But after, again, 30 years, that was a great victory. So I'm also really proud of that. January 6th, I was in my office. We had told the staff not to come in because, not that we expected that kind of activity, but we knew there were going to be lots of weird people around town. So we said, just don't bother, stay home. But I came into the office, obviously, because I was going to have to vote on to confirm the election. And so I'm sitting in my office. I did not go into the chamber, which I'm eternally grateful for. I said, I can watch it on TV, it's fine. And so I'm sitting there. We got evacuated once because of the bomb threat that was across the street, the pipe bomb that they still haven't found the perpetrator. And for about 45 minutes, I get back to my office, and then 10 minutes later, I get this thing on my phone. It says, external threat to the Capitol. Stay in your office, close the door, lock the door, and stay away from the windows. So immediately, I'm focused on the television, and for the next 6-7 hours, that's where I was. And I had friends who were in the gallery who were texting me and telling me what was going on and how petrified they were. And I'm watching it just totally unable to process what was going on. It was such, and at that time, I'm watching TV like you all are, so I'm just seeing what's going on outside the Capitol. I'm not seeing what's going inside when, near the speaker's lobby where the woman from California was shot and all that. Obviously, we didn't know any of that. So I never felt personally threatened, but I was very, very frightened for my colleagues who were inside the Capitol. It's something I still haven't processed. We had an anniversary recognition of that day, obviously in January, and it was a very amazing program that we had, and I had a media thing, a hit that I was supposed to do at 3 o'clock, and the longer this program went on, the more I started getting emotional, and it was kind of like PTSD in a way, a thing that all the emotions I felt on the actual day had returned, and I had to leave. I said, I got to pull myself together before I do this media interview. And it's the thing that I have never been able to process is how Americans could attack Americans with American flags and other things with a feeling that they were in some way being patriotic. I never will be able to figure that out.
So I'm interested in your civic commitment, because you've always been someone, I think we've made it pretty clear to everyone here that you really care about this city, you really care about being a civic participant in our city. Mm-hmm. What do you want to do in your retirement as far as civic involvement?
For the last few years, I've been co-teaching a course at U of L on Congress with Jasmine Ferrier. I love doing it, and I hope to continue doing that. And I have another idea for a course that I'd like to teach. If they would have me, and I hope I'll do some writing. I hope to get some kind of association with a policy shop in DC, so that I still keep my hand in the policy arena, whether it's Brookings or something like that, and then I'm available to babysit. Yeah.
Congressman, my only question I would like to get you to verify. I know you like to spend a lot of time in Ireland, and go out there. Was your property on a Trump property out there?
Yes. So Kathy and I joined a club in Ireland. I've been going there since the early 1990s. On a regular basis, and have fallen in love with the place and love to play golf there and have friends there. And so in 2003, I think, that I joined this club called Doonbeg, which is on the west coast of Ireland. Mm-hmm. And then in 2005, we bought a unit in the clubhouse there. And then, unfortunately, a few years ago, Donald Trump bought it. Bought the whole place. So now we are property owners.
You're a tenant of Donald Trump?
We're property owners.
Oh, okay.
No, we're property owners in a Donald Trump-owned facility.
Well.
And I will say one thing. I will give him credit. He and his company, his sons, have invested a fair amount of money in the golf course, and they've really improved it. And I think he ought to stick to golf.
I think that's the first good thing. The first good thing I've ever heard you say about Donald Trump. Well, John Allen Yarmuth, thank you very much. You've done good, as they say.
Thanks, man.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Congressman Yarmuth, and thank you, Phil. That was a great interview. I do want to announce, we have 2 programs to announce for next year already. Our March 9th program is going to be the State of West Louisville. Among our panelists will be Metro Council President David James and Kevin Fields, Louisville Central Community Center President. And of interest from tonight's conversation, on May 11th, we will have a 3rd Congressional District Democratic primary debate with Senator Morgan McGarvey and Representative Attica Scott. So get your tickets now. Thank you and have a good night.